Hi there, I'm Nicole Wilbur. I'm a writer and story nerd, and today I am taking a deep dive into the best, most innovative character development I have seen on TV, and it happens to be in the show Sex Education. The character isn't Otis, or Maeve, or Ola, or even this guy. It's this lady. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm quickly going to explain what's up, what we're talking about. Sex Education is a dramedy on Netflix about a guy named Otis whose mom is a sex therapist. He starts a clinic at school to give other students advice on how to deal with this, with a sort of rebel, tough girl named Maeve in order to make money. This discussion is going to be centered on episode 3 because this character only shows up in episode 3. She is only in episode 3. So, in episode 3, Maeve finds out she is pregnant and she goes to the clinic to get an abortion. She's told someone needs to pick her up, but she doesn't have anyone in her life really, so she asks her new friend Otis to meet her there without telling him what it's for. And basically what follows is my favorite episode of TV ever. I've seen this so many times. It is the perfect balance of humor and seriousness, and it puts every single other teen drama who has tried to do a scene about abortion to complete and total shame. So why is it so good? So a mediocre show would have had the girl kind of sitting in the waiting room looking frightened, and then maybe showed her in the procedure room. But the writers took a real risk here, and they actually spent time in this clinic to show what it would actually be like. And this lady in any other show would have been a walk-on. Actually, I think her name is Sarah, but we don't really find that out. Nobody will remember her name. But in this episode, she is a fully three-dimensional character. So I am borrowing the term three-dimensional character, or the three-dimensional character framework, from story engineering. And I'll talk about that in a second. But in the book, it literally states, it is a mistake to dive too deeply into peripheral characters. That is not the case here. So they made this lady, Sarah, the heart and soul of the episode, who perfectly demonstrates the emotional complexities of the issue at hand. So how did they do it? All right, we're going to talk about this through three-dimensional character framework. So when she first walks in, she is quite loud and obnoxious. Her clothes are 80s style. She's not fancy. She's panting. She kind of comes in. She's like, "Those stairs suck." And then she says, "All right, ladies. All right, loves." She's greeting everybody in the waiting room. And then she gets a form from the nurse and says, "I've been here before. I know what to do." And she starts loudly asking them to change the channel. So remember, this is all happening in the waiting room of a clinic where everyone is very quiet and solemn and no one's speaking. You've been in a waiting room. How often does someone come in and just start talking to the room? And she comes in like a bomb, psh, and yeah, craziness. She also then goes and changes the TV channel and then starts yelling the answers to a quiz show. She puts her arm around Maeve, who's this tough girl who no one would really put their arm around. She's giving advice, yelling at the TV, and finally Maeve asks her to be quiet. And those are our first two scenes where we experience her. So all of that was first dimension character development. In the first dimension of character development, you show the reader your character as they exist, and you leave them to find the meaning to it and apply the meaning to it. So these are things like outfit, hair color, the car that someone drives, their outward-facing personality. These are the character's surface choices, how they want to be seen in the world. So clearly, she's making her surface choices. That's all we see is the surface. So not every audience member will take the same meaning away from Sarah, from this character. When I first watched this episode and saw her, I assumed she was kind of callous and also a little bit socially inept, read the room, you know what I mean? She kind of embodies also the worst sort of stereotype about a woman who gets this procedure, as if she's using it as birth control, or it's fun, or she does it all the time. And I believe the writers actually intended for that to be the case, for her to appear as if she embodied that stereotype. Take what meaning you will from it. All we know here is her outward appearance, her first dimension of character development. So meaning is applied to action when we get into the second dimension of character development. So second dimension character development is kind of the reason people are doing things in their head. It's why they're acting the way they are. It encompasses the character's backstory, their agenda, their motivations, etc., etc. And then the third dimension, because going on from here, we kind of have them interweaved, It's who the character is at their core and what actions, choices, and behaviors they have when there are greater consequences. So like there's not huge consequences just walking into a waiting room, but in other scenarios, like who are they truly when it counts? That's what third dimension character development is all about. So far in the episode, we've seen first dimension character development, but also one tiny piece of second dimension character development, which is we know that this lady has had the procedure before. The very next scene I think would be called third dimension character development. So Maeve, Sarah, the lady, and another woman are just sitting outside the operating area waiting to go in, and the one lady, not Maeve, starts crying. And so Sarah is like looking at her, and then she grabs her hand and she says, "Hey, it'll be all right, I promise." And then she goes over, they kind of have them sitting here, and then she reaches over and she tries to take Maeve's hand, and Maeve won't, and then she's like, "Just take my bloody hand," and then they hold hands. And she's like holding hands like this, and then she does the wave, and and making them laugh, and she does it again, and then they all laugh. And then just after she does that, she like closes her eyes and she takes a big deep breath as if she's trying not to cry. And so here we get a lot of information. So she's obviously still outgoing and behaving a little bit out of social norms, but she's doing it to comfort other people, right? So if you've ever been in this kind of situation where you don't know the people around you, most people would just sort of sit there while they're all feeling worried or scared or sad, but she broke the rules of a waiting room again to comfort everybody else. So we see that she is kind. When she does the funny wave thing, we see that she uses that humor and that kind of outgoing, unexpected stuff to make other people feel better. And so all of this action circumvents the meanings that we applied to her actions earlier. She's clearly upset, so she's not callous as she seemed. It's not as routine as it seems, as this gives us a clue to who she truly is. So in the next scene, they're waking up from the procedure, in the next scene that she's in, and a nurse is coming around and giving all of the women pudding. And we get a really interesting moment of second dimension character development that doesn't seem like it. So Sarah is given vanilla pudding by the nurse, and she's like, "I really don't like vanilla, do you have chocolate?" And they kind of get in this interesting argument, and it's in some ways it's like, why does she seems very demanding. She keeps asking for chocolate pudding. She's like, "I know you have some in the back, could you just get me some?" And the nurse just keeps saying, "No, we don't have any. And you finally get the sense that like maybe they actually do have chocolate pudding, especially when the nurse says, "Maybe there'll be a chocolate one next time you're here." I think this is second dimension character development, even though it's kind of hidden as it, because it's backstory. It's backstory to the kind of like judgment and experiences of like judgment that Sarah has faced about getting this procedure in the past. So in the next shot, we see her crying, like really upset, and we know that she is very, very affected by that nurse's judgment, and it does make her feel terrible. And it seems it's very much implied through the whole action that she has experienced this kind of judgment and shame and this sort of situation before. And I think that's really important second dimension character development, because it indicates some of the meaning behind what she's doing, is that she actually is feeling very guilty. So then Maeve goes over to give her chocolate pudding. So Maeve got chocolate pudding, and she comes over and she's like, "Take my chocolate pudding." That's a cool moment because it actually develops Maeve's character in a very third dimension kind of way, like a truest self moment. And Sarah reacts and says, "Oh, you're not as tough as you look." And you see kindness from Maeve as well in that sort of situation, and compassion. The word is compassion. But then Sarah says something really interesting. She says, "Look, love, don't worry. I have 3 children, and I feel way more guilty about the ones that I had than the ones that I chose not to. It's better not to be a mom at all than being a bad one." And this moment is amazing because we get more backstory on her. She feels guilty about her children. She does feel some guilt about her procedures, the children she didn't have. And maybe even more judgmental people in the audience will be like, "Oh, so she's a bad mom," you know what I mean? But we also get a third dimension character moment here where she's comforting another woman, even as she's just experienced this like really awful bit of judgment. She's trying to comfort Maeve and help her and make her feel better. And that all happens in one line. We get second and third dimension character development all in one line, and then it kind of ties it up when she's kind of crying before she eats her pudding. You see how really affected she is by it. And the final moment of her development, the final time we see her, her daughter arrives at the clinic. So we see her walking in, say, "Hi, Mom," and giving her like a really big hug. And then she says, "Come on, let's bring you home." And that's our final twist. It's crazy. It's so crazy how they did this in such a short amount of time. But basically the character development, as I see it, is this. Because the daughter came to pick her up, we know she's a loving mother to 3 children, at least one of whom clearly loves her a lot, and they seemed very close when they hugged and stuff, which pretty much contradicts her statement in a way that she's a bad mom. We know from her dialogue that she feels a great deal of guilt and shame around all of her children, and she also goes out of the way to comfort others and to help alleviate that shame and guilt from them. So now her earlier behavior is put into perspective. She wasn't being callous and brash. She was trying to normalize the procedure so she wouldn't have to feel all that shame and guilt around being there again, so she wouldn't have to feel her feelings, and maybe to try to help other people a little bit too, to make it normal to talk, you know what I mean? Not to, like, we don't have to be shrouded in like the shadows and silence like you would have maybe had to be at like a back alley clinic 100 years ago. You know, she's saying, she was putting on a bit of a show, but it was for everyone's benefit. She's really just normalizing it. And so we have the most amazing character in 5 minutes or less. This episode is overall totally amazing. I've seen it many, many times because I was just blown away by how funny and complex and heartfelt and non-cliche and true it seemed. They also developed other minor characters, the protesters outside. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, and you could do this 3 dimensions of character development to them as well. For developing our own characters, I love the 3-dimensional framework, and I felt like it applied really, really well here because it happens in such quick succession that we see her first dimension and then get everything in the backstory, and we're left with this incredibly complex, interesting character. This is exactly how I think about my characters. So when I read this framework, I was like, oh yes, this is it. So I highly recommend checking out, maybe not story engineering, but I will try to see if I can find just an article on 3-dimensional character development that you can use instead of having to buy the book. Note, this is really interesting from this. I also learned that you don't necessarily have to have first dimension and then do second dimension and then do third dimension. Though the lines do get a little blurry between them, and you can really weave some of these together, especially in a longer piece with a longer character. So let me know below, who is your favorite character and how are they developed? Why do you love them so much? What kind of character framework do you use? And thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, you can do that. I'm gonna keep on posting videos once a week, every Thursday, and see you next time.